right. Well, thank you everyone for coming, first of all. So for those of you I don't know or haven't met me, my name is Ian McPherson. I work here at AWS in our Industry Innovation Centers. And if you were at this morning's keynote, Chris Blandy talked about how we created these innovation centers to focus on specific areas and workflows in the overall media workflows, so that we could help develop and deliver solutions and integrated packages that will help companies move more quickly to the cloud. So it's my good fortune today to get to lead this panel and talk about media supply chain, which is one of the innovation centers that I lead. And let's start just with some introductions. So I've said who I am. Can you guys just introduce yourselves?
Sure. Tyler Robinson for HBO Studios, working with the production operations group, helping service our productions, providing either liaisons for best of breed software that exists from vendors, as well as spearheading our internal development efforts for centralization, content management, content acquisition, following through the QC pipeline, and then delivery into the greater media supply chain.
Wow. Cool. Gotta live up to that.
Hi, I'm Stephen Buxbaum. I'm the SVP at Fotokem and run Media Services Division. Really what we deal with is content owners, studios, creators to deliver their products to platforms, broadcast, and the internet. And we're very excited to be here and discuss how we work in the cloud.
Hi, and I am not Greg Geyer. I'm Larry Kaplan. I'm co-founder and CEO of STVI, and we are the supply chain and the cloud people, and happy to be here.
Great. And so first of all, Larry, thank you very much for standing in at the last minute. He was a last minute substitute. Greg wasn't able to make it today, so I really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure.
So let's just start with, we've been working on media supply chain in the cloud for a while, but why did you even start down this path? I'm curious for each of you.
I'll go first. We had to. So historically, and not to necessarily get into any trouble, but historically, HBO's had two different offices in the United States. Well, more than that, but primarily New York, and then kind of a satellite office here in LA. And of course, we got projects done and everything, but there was always that conversation as to where we were going to stand up the hardware. And when we've got, original programming and a lot of our scripted series based out of here, some stuff made sense in LA, some stuff made sense in New York. And it was always a back and forth. There was always a lot of headaches with trying to figure out a bunch of stuff between, where we had the available network infrastructure or sometimes even available rack space. And we were in progress on an internal tool that we call Keystone, and the development of that when we had to basically, which was content management, keeping track of schedules, production metadata, relatively simple stuff, and simple. We had to basically attach on a new content acquisition pipeline for the platform formerly known as HBO Max that was standing up, and we didn't have any way of getting content that wasn't going to be referenced by a large number of our legacy systems. So, instead of having that back and forth fight, as to where it was primarily going to reside, we really started looking at the cloud, which was really advantageous for us because after we started this project, started building up our AWS infrastructure, started talking to SDVI, we closed our Santa Monica office during COVID, and the new one that we were building here in Culver City wasn't finished. And we didn't have a place to put any of our servers or equipment or anything like that. And of course, we got through it all. But had that happened to this project, while we were building everything up, it would have been, a nightmare. A bigger one than COVID was. And so having this semi-infinite data center that we could attach on and be able to connect these two disparate regions in a fairly economical way was, game changer for us. So,
Stephen?
A little different at our end. So Fotokem is 60 years old a few months ago, and the only division was a media service division that wasn't on the cloud. They brought me over to Fotokem to not only get them on the cloud, but to work on efficiencies here. Several of our studio clients were asking about the cloud, didn't have a lot of knowledge about certain things here, and I came over with, the first few months I was there, it was to get the clients up to speed and to get Fotokem up to speed on how the cloud would help them. And over the last really 6 months to a year to 6 months, I've really gone through a lot of evolution of the cloud, understanding the cloud, and we're still learning things every day. But really has made our workflows efficient, kept our overhead costs down, and really helped us to keep our margins where they are.
So Larry, we take maybe more of a builder's approach with you. We've worked together for quite a while. Mm-hmm. What was it that back in 2016 or whenever
2015, yeah.
2015?
Yeah.
Cloud wasn't the default by any means then.
Well, credit to Mr. Honeycutt at Discovery, and Richard Friedel and Clyde Smith at Old Fox. And as it turned out, they both went into initial production in the same month. It was June of 2015. And the motivations were a little different. In the case of Discovery, John said, I'm not buying another server. My stuff is old. I just don't want to buy it. And we're going to go all the way in the cloud. So credit to his vision. And in the case of Richard Friedel at Fox and Clyde, I think Richard just had an instinct that I need to do this. So different, but classic early adopters, I think, in both cases.
Sure. These are continuous journeys, and there's always something new
Yes.
on the horizon. Maybe tell me what has surprised you positively, and what's been the bigger challenges that you've seen that were not expected as you've done this?
We've been on this journey for a couple of years now, and it's still, I'm still constantly surprised about the elasticity that the cloud provides, and like we keep saying cloud as if it's one big thing, right. But there's so many other things in the idea that we're looking to be agile, and we're looking to be nimble, and we're looking to do that in every way, and the flexibility that AWS offers, SDVI's infrastructure offers, is something where I'm still retraining my brain from all the standard processes that we had to do, where it's I want to try this transcoder. I want to see, I might not even have a plan. Just I've heard about this transcoder, and it's okay, I don't have to go through an RFP or do a POC and have one of my data centers partially torn apart because this guy's installing a bunch of servers in a rack that I may end up not using. But also always on the search of newer, better, if I'm up-resing something and this box makes it up-res and look better, I'm on board with this now, and I want to continue that. If it doesn't, I don't want to spend all that time and everything. And so just the way that you can dip your toe and see, is this going to work? The other side of that's the failing fast, and sometimes you check out a bunch of stuff and it doesn't work out. But that's all been super great. And then in terms of what we're still managing the other side of that, where it's we're spinning up a new AWS account to basically do a POC, and we're going to build a bunch of stuff up in there, and need to make sure you put away all your toys. Like you need to make sure you're not still paying for a database cluster that you spun up for a project that's 6 months done now. You have to make sure to keep track of everything that you've been doing in all these different locations. But the benefits definitely outweigh the cons for us.
So we're a little different. Kind of the old school way of file-based workflows has always been get the master, make a deliverable, keep the deliverable, keep the master, keep every version of the deliverable, and then someday we'll deliver that somewhere. So the storage got a little crazy. Then we started going to LTO, and we had LTOs and LTOs and shelves, and every time we had to restore something, it was a big effort to do that. So we came in with the philosophy of we're going to make one pristine source master that becomes what we call our service-ready master, and then from that we can make anything. And the best part about it is we deliver it, and then we delete it. And if we need it again, we just call up the recipe, we remake it. So it's really been efficiency, it saves us on costs. We don't have to buy more local storage. We don't need faster networks inside of it, inside the facility here. When the file sizes change from Dolby Vision and UHD files here, it's not a problem. It takes a little bit longer to process, but really the model has been what took us 6 weeks to do, we do in 6 hours now.
It's a great metric. Larry, how about you? I mean, in terms of this journey,
What are the
things that you've been surprised, pleasantly surprised with, and what are the things, well, that was a bigger challenge than I anticipated?
I think it goes back to the beginning where we thought hybrid would be a bigger deal. We thought everyone would want to do that. And as it turned out, when people started out in the cloud and they got a feel for it and began to have a sense for what was possible, the notion for hybrid just went away. And if anything, it accelerated people's desire to move more and more use cases to the cloud. So that has been surprising.
So we talk about supply chain as though it's a singular thing. Most companies have multiple supply chains they're dealing with based on where it's being delivered, the kind of content they're dealing with. You think cloud has led to people being able to be independent and increasing the number of supply chains, or do you think it's actually helped consolidate them more?
Well, I don't know how much of it's necessarily independence, because being part of HBO within the greater Warner Brothers Discovery organization, like we have our supply chains downstream, they have their supply chains. I have supply chains that exist specifically to feed into their supply chains, and now we're making efforts in order to increase that connectivity on the vendor side, so that when Fotokem's doing fine work on one of our shows, they pop it over to us, and boom, it's so much easier than the days when we were sending drives to each other, or like the random Aspera Fastpacks package that could contain almost anything in it. I think that what we're at least what we're seeing is that our supply chains are becoming much more fluid, where the overall numbers of supply chains are decreasing, but what each supply chain does is much more flexible. Where maybe with our on-premise stuff, it was, if I want to go through this workflow, I drop a file in this watch folder, it does whatever, it pops out this one. If I want to do something else, I do that, or I've got someone dragging and dropping. Now I can have a deliverable from Fotokem, and that comes in the beginning, and then based on metadata of that file, it takes various pathways and still ends up at the destination. But whether it starts 2398 or it starts 25 or any other number of things, is this something that we're distributing through EMEA? Like, do I need additional components as part of this asset to follow through and checks and balances and stuff like that? Where these all would have been very separate, distinct things, managed probably also by very separate and distinct groups on the operations side. And so while we're still definitely in the multiple supply chain world, they're so much more robust than what we had before.
Yeah, it's interesting. We live by 3 letters now, API. Your supply chain talks to our supply chain and really makes things efficient. The trends are that studios are creating their own libraries in somebody's cloud bucket, and for us to either go get it or they send it to us, and we just have our system talk to your system, and hopefully everything works correctly. I mean, we have developers that just do nothing but write APIs to talk to different systems here. And as we start to talk to our clients and they learn what we can do, we learn what they have, it makes it very easy here. And things that used to take us, years to develop now can be done in months. And with a little bit of testing and patience here, we really can work very quickly to onboard a studio, onboard a platform, and be the middle of that to deliver the content.
Larry, what about you? Do you see your companies coming to you and saying, well, we're going to set up one for this division, one for this division, or do you think it's more aligning different parts of organizations?
Well, I think I would describe that as what we've been through the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Companies focusing internally on their supply chains. And what Steve and Tyler just described, I would describe as a supply chain 2.0, which is now, wait a minute, we're part of a bigger supply chain. So if you kind of take that view, you say, well, wait a minute, he's QCing this content, and then why am I QCing the same content? What? That doesn't make any sense. So I think we see customers, and Steve and Tyler are great examples of where they're thinking, well, wait a minute, I'm getting content from there, I'm sending it over here, why don't I look at it holistically and eliminate waste and make that whole thing more efficient? And we see the beginnings of that now. And I think the notion of content exchange via supply chains that consist of multiple companies is going to be the next 10 years.
That's a great segue. So I get to wear 2 hats. I get my media supply chain hat. I also run the data science and analytics IIC, and so my life gets to be very data-driven. And I'm curious, let me start with you, Stephen. How do you see the role of data informing what you do in your supply chains?
Well, that's a loaded question. I mean, we live off data. We live off everyone's data, and then we create our own, and then we make reports on all that and then analyze. So it's a continuous loop of processing data all the time here. One of the things that we are trying to work on is this data overload. Do we need to look at this data? Do we need to look at that? What you're sending, do you already have metadata? We don't need to create metadata anymore. But you're missing something. We need to let you know that you're missing something. Now, do you want us to create that, or do you want to do that? And so this back and forth between data is very important. I think years ago there was discussions about a metadata database for titles, and there's things that are being built with using IMDb and some other database software here that's going to be very beneficial here, but every studio wants to do it a little differently. And we have to go by what the client wants at this point here. The only thing we can do is to make it more efficient at our end so that we're not having to do a lot of manual labor. Really has been our goal is to increase our business without increasing our overhead, and that's what products like SDVI and working with clients' APIs has allowed us to do, and quickly.
Continue leading the witness, but Larry, I mean, you guys certainly have a complete data practice that goes along with the supply chain practice. How do you see the role of data informing how you're supporting your customers?
I think to date, our more advanced users take the data that the platform generates, which we don't throw anything out. So there's a tremendous amount of data there, and a number of users create their own very specific dashboards that are unique to their operations, because as Steve said, they tend to be unique to a particular facility, and so we very much support that. I will say that there's a few users who use it in a very powerful way. The one that has always impressed me is those that think of their facilities as factories, right? So they go to factory type metrics, and one of the ones that I see a few people using that is very powerful is this notion of resources per output asset. Okay, how much technical resource did it take for me to output that asset, whatever that asset is? And the more sophisticated users track that over time, right? And they've also found that that's a surrogate for agility, right? Because as they push that efficiency metric, they find that they get more agile. So that's really impressive, and we've seen a number of users just get incredible results by that. So that would not have been possible unless you had the core data to work with to be able to make that insight.
Yeah, and I would say de-siloed data too, right? You've got these bespoke systems previously that you wouldn't be able to join the data easily, right? Mm-hmm. Curious, Tyler, I mean, how do you see the role of data or benchmarks in what you guys are doing?
Yeah, I mean, echoing a lot of these sentiments, like, there's historically been so many silos within just our organization, right? And, data can be like a religion, and everybody thinks about things maybe just a little bit differently. Even amongst ourselves, again, HBO New York versus HBO West Coast, but also HBO versus Turner, and now versus Discovery, right? Like, we make different content, and we look at the data about our content differently too. And then there's a million different types of data that we're talking about in reference to the supply chain, right? Like, I can look at how much it cost me to make this deliverable that I sent downstream for this one episode of television. I can also look at reports about the efficiency of my supply chains. Like, oh, do I have a problematic transcoder that keeps failing on jobs, and that increases the amount of time it takes? What's the delivery of stuff coming into my supply chains? And again, going back to that elasticity, like, what did it take to spin up to handle kind of that burst content? Typically we get, show's got 10 episodes. We get episode 1, episode 2, weeks go by, we get episode 3, everything's great. We just had a mini series, they delivered all 6 episodes at once. And so that's, 6 hours as opposed to, just 30 minutes. And how did the supply chain react to that change from that one production? And, I think before we were so focused on things from different perspectives, like production by production analytics, like looking at a show across a season. And now that we have all of these seasons being processed by the same tools simultaneously, we can start looking at things from more of a studio perspective than maybe we were before. So it's, again, yeah, data overload is a real thing, but also because the data is so different, you try and have different teams managing those different things, right? Because hopefully in theory, the person that cares about the transcoder performing successfully is a different person than the financial metrics or whatever.
Hopefully.
But hopefully. We all wear a lot of hats, so sometimes it's the same. But yeah, it's always illuminating. But I think you can also with a lot of things, right? A little bit of skepticism in the beginning, because I think when sometimes all this stuff gets open to you, you start trying to draw conclusions from things that you're seeing, right? Finding patterns when maybe there aren't any. And sometimes that can lead you to running right into a wall. And you learn from that and you go forward. But yeah, it's again, like with the rest of the cloud, it's the benefits have outweighed the cons for us. So.
Sure. So Larry, I want to go back to something you mentioned and touch on that. That notion of the 2.0 of supply chains and the extended supply chains, connecting your operations and your vendors you work with. How do you evaluate vendors to make sure that they're going to actually work effectively in that kind of next generation environment?
How do we as a vendor evaluate?
Yeah, I mean, so
vendors?
you're an orchestration platform.
We love them all.
Yeah, but
we're a
there's
platform.
certain. I mean, certainly best practices, API driven, right? I mean, is there some way that you're helping customers evaluate the potential components that would go into the orchestrated supply chain?
Well, I think in many ways, quite literally, our more advanced users drive our strategies, right? And those users tend to bring specific partners into the discussion, right? It's a lot of relationships, and I think this notion of supply chain 2.0. There are a number of initiatives underway by a number of users in this direction, and we and a few other vendors are part of that. So it sounds corny, I suppose, but it's just a matter of listening and watching what your customers are doing. The case of what Steve and Tyler described, the story that A&E and Discovery tells about the deal that they did, and the ability to move A&E's entire library over to Discovery in less than 24 hours, because they just got together and they did it. They figured out the mapping, right? Because their metadata was a little different than theirs, and they sat down, they figured it out, put a table together, hit the button, and less than 24 hours later, they'd moved the entire library over to Discovery. And I think, as I recall, it cost them about $200.
Wow.
About $200. And it made a targeted air date in the contract possible. And if they had not been able to do it, they would have missed the air date by a mile. So we watched that, and we said, maybe there is a product opportunity there. Maybe.
Yeah.
So I think that's it's really just watching what your more interesting users are doing.
Yeah. I mean, Tyler, you mentioned the term agility, right? And this seems to play into that. And I seem to have heard that you guys had some large deliveries that you had to do. How did cloud factor into that?
I mean, it was a deciding factor. Again, not to get in trouble, but sometimes we don't always get an appropriate amount of lead time to successfully accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. I'm sure everywhere that you folks work is very well managed and scheduled and everything like that.
You're alone in that problem.
Yeah, it's an HBO thing. Yeah, there's so many, somebody comes running in and it's like, hey, we've got these library titles that we need to turn into this format, or we need to process and check something. And, there's catalogs of content that are maybe more so for us, but being shuffled around and, what kind of metadata do you have on all these assets? And, we don't have time for interns or PAs to watch every episode of everything that we've got in the vault. And so the ability to, throw something in, lift and shift the archive stack into the cloud. So then it's there. I can, process 500 files through, one analyzing tool and get a response back and keep that metadata on hand for the next time somebody asks for it. And then somebody's going to ask a question about, that same content that's going to be different enough that I'm going to have to run it all through again. We're looking forward, I think, today where, when we make a season of television. We're thinking about the future and like, oh, if I'm remastering this in 10 years, what am I like? Do I have enough data to make it easy, or do I not have that data and I'm going to shift it to Steven so they have to do all the work?
I'd like you to do that, by the way, more.
And then also being able to try things, going back to something that I said earlier, where it's like, I've got a subset of data in the cloud, and either there's a new transcoder or there's an AI tool that's available, and I just kind of want to see when it's done, what it can do, like celebrity face detection in content. It's like, well, like I know Ed Harris is going to come on screen at a certain point in this episode of Westworld. I'm not necessarily getting anything there, but there are a lot of other tools that we can use to reduce a lot of the manual work that we were doing before. Like some of us, I'm sure, remember the days when you had like a PA that had to watermark each script individually, right? And that was what somebody did 8 hours whenever a new script came out, right? And then we had tools that let you do that automatically, and there was a certain amount of like, okay, do we trust this to work? And the first time it runs, you're like checking to see everybody, like nothing's weird. But by the 10th time, you're like, yes, this works, this is good, and it makes things a million times faster. And technologies in the cloud are the same way, and we can try them so much easier than you can on-prem. And speaking to Larry's point about customers driving the decision of things, like we take advantage of that too. When AWS develops something in Media Convert for NFL, that could be something that helps us out. When SDVI adds a new provider, it's easy for me to, slack my TAM and be like, hey, we want to check that out in the dev silo real quick. Like, spin one up and let me see if this is going to work for us. Sometimes I might have something where it's like, oh, hey, we've got that residuals issue that we still need to find like a better solution for. And then sometimes it's just learning to explore the product and having the hands-on experience so much easier than, I'm talking to this vendor and they've only got 3 of these demo boxes, and I'm in line after Steven and Greg at Sony, so I'm not getting I'm not getting results for 2 more months, right?
Yeah. So Steven, that notion of agility, how has that changed your thoughts on what your capacity to deliver is?
So I wear a sales hat at times. And an example of that was in late February, I got a call from a client who said, I have 85 seasons of episodes. I don't know how many yet, but we need them delivered, and we have 4 weeks to do this in. And of course I said, yes, no problem. And then I said, oh my God, what did I just do? And got our teams together here and figured this out, and that was the moment that we decided to put this whole workflow into the cloud. Between us, we weren't 100% sure whether everything was going to work. It actually did, and thanks to SDVI and some other products that we used, it did. But a few nights I didn't sleep very well, but we made it. Actually, we made it early, and the order increased a little bit at that point, and we, at the end of everything, we said, wow, this is the way we need to do things in the future. It really was soup to nuts, everything that we had asked for in the products and in the workflows, and we hit a home run for the client. And from that, we've gotten additional work because of that capability here. And as I said, things that took us months to do, we do in days now. One of the things that will be beneficial is when all of our clients start getting all of their content up in the cloud. So there's a lot of moving data around. There's a lot of, it's in this format, we got to transcode and we have to do that. But what we're trying to do is to come up with a standard, what we're calling service ready, in the cloud, so that whatever, we can make anything from that without a problem and completely automated.
So that's a great segue, because I wanted to talk about, advice for folks. And you've just sort of undergone this kind of migration or adoption. What advice do you have to people, or what do you wish you would have known before you'd started that you know now, when you start this journey?
Wish I would have known. I guess I didn't know how powerful the cloud was, and the cloud is just some computers in some data center. It's nothing up in the sky, even though some people think that. Where's the computers up there? But understanding really the power of the cloud, and really cost savings. One of the things that was hard for us to figure out at the beginning is we're going to need to pay a lot of money for our cloud storage and for our egress fees here, but what is that going to save us overhead-wise? And the math really works out. We have to look at it every day, and we have to go through our reporting every day here to make sure that we haven't done something wrong. Sometimes you can leave the switch on too long, and you get that wonderful bill. It's like leaving your air conditioning on the whole summer. But overall, it's a cost savings to us. It allows us to keep our margins where they need to be and compete against our facilities that are trying to take work away from us. So it's important here.
And Larry, how about you? I mean, you guys are helping companies move to the cloud. What is your advice at the beginning of that journey when you start working with people?
Well, I think it goes back to Mr. Honeycutt. His original vision was that this was ultimately for the entire enterprise. And what we see frequently is people don't have that view, that they have a particular use case, they want to solve that problem, and okay, what next? And they're missing a huge opportunity there to get a much more return. So I think it's the notion that a operation is a collection of use cases. They're all interrelated, and if you view it that way, the optimization potential is enormous. This is not outsourcing transcoding. That isn't what this is about. So I think it's the enterprise view is really fundamental to a really successful, and obviously both Stephen and Tyler had that notion, I think.
And Tyler, so in that equation, how much of it is the tech transformation, and how much of it is bringing the people into that process and getting buy-in?
It swings back and forth. I'd say sometimes it's 100% trying to get people on board with changing the way they've been doing things. We have legacy systems at HBO that are still based around the idea of tape. So they've been doing the same process the same way for a long time, and we're desperately trying to change that. And then sometimes it's about coming up with an elegant technical solution to what's inherently an operations issue, and finding that way between it, because it's something where automation is great, and we've been able to implement a ton of it, and it's sped up so much of what we've been able to do. But because that human oversight is still such a important component to the process, that you have to get that buy-in from the users. If somebody needs to do steps A, B, and C to QC or validate a QC of a piece of content, so that a coffee cup doesn't show up where it's not supposed to, or there's not any green screen fingers that aren't supposed to be there. Anything that you can do, but in this industry, there's a ton of great software out there, right? There's so many companies that build best of breed things, and a lot of it's finding out what drives that development, what their approach is, and trying to mimic those same things. Because it's when you get, we've been doing a lot of work with our content enhancement team lately that handles globalization of our content. And there's been, what we see is some kind of fundamental tools that have been missing the entire time, and being able to provide those, like you get very happy and ecstatic users. When it doesn't work, you have very angry users. But it's balancing those two things, and I think one of the nice things again is with this semi-infinite infrastructure available to you, you can build things with the human element in mind. You're not necessarily constrained by physics the same way. I'm probably talking about rack space more than any of you folks care about, but like running into those old issues of like, oh, we have to, like, it's going to be slower for this operator in this room because we haven't been able to do a fiber run, and the box is like 3 floors down or something, right? Like, all these different things, like it's not there anymore. Like those problems don't exist the same way they used to, and so it's really opened things up for us.
So I would say, like, Stephen, you guys have a global operation, right? I mean, you're supporting a global customer base. Talk a little bit about how collaboration is fostered, and what's changed in the way people work with each other in your processes.
Yeah, well, I guess on the customer side of it here is we do a lot of listening. One of the things we really learned was to listen to what the client has to say. Sometimes they don't always know what they're doing. Sometimes they think they know what they're doing and want to guide us in a maybe different direction here, but really understand so we can make this efficient for them. One of the things that I believe that we do very well at Fotokem is we listen to the customer and we communicate with the customer. A lot of companies just they've automated communication, and go look at your dashboard if you want to know what's going on. We hold their hand a little bit here. There's an education process even for the studios to understand how the cloud works. We're one of the studios that we have, the marketing department that we do a lot of work for, just doesn't understand the cloud here. But we're doing a lot of cloud servicing for them. So there's a gentle way of kind of letting them know how it works here at that point here. Obviously budgets are important, so we have to deal with that every day, where they've got X amount of dollars to spend, and if it costs us more than that, we've got to figure out a way either to get our costs down or to get more money out of the client. And so that is really important in our business. Used to be, well, we'll take a loss in this division and we'll pick it up over here, or we'll make it up in volume, things like that. That doesn't work anymore. So the client does understand that the cost structure is different in certain areas. So that's another part that we have to deal with the clients. But again, back to we listen to what they're asking for here, and we hopefully give them a solution that's efficient, that's cost effective, and gets their product delivered on time. And that's the most important part.
Larry, I mean, let me ask you, where's the corporate office?
We really don't have one. We have a very small office in Sunnyvale, but as you know, we are living the distributed environment. We're a small medium-sized company, and we're in 19 states and 6 countries.
And how would that have worked 10 years ago?
It would not have. But today it's terrific. When COVID happened, operationally for us as a company, it was business as usual, because we started out fully distributed. So we were very fortunate that when we started the company, we made some decisions at the right time, and that turned out to be quite successful. We thought that as we got more people around particular cities like San Francisco or Portland or Oregon, that our folks would want offices, and hasn't happened.
And you, Tyler, have a distributed organization as well, I assume?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of us still work remote. We've got the new office in Culver City, but I mean, we've had productions around the world. We continue to have productions around the world. There are epicenters in LA, Atlanta, London, and stuff like that. But if something pops up in Asia Pacific, there's AWS regions to support that now, and moving all of that infrastructure. And something that we haven't necessarily touched about is being able to, duplicate things so much easier from one region or one cloud instance to another one, and reduce some of that processing, because it still takes time to move, giant DPX sequences from one side of the world to the other. And maybe you don't need to do that. You just do all the work locally, as it were, or in the closest region, and then you make your servicing master, you pass that over, and then continue your normal supply chain processing from there. You don't have to, I don't know if anybody's gone through the lovely, shipping dailies drives back and forth via FedEx or anything like that from remote locations. Sure, that's still going to happen because, you still need bandwidth wherever you are, and, jungles and rainforests and things like that. You're not going to see the speeds that you want to see, but it just, it's made everything that we've done so much easier.
Great. Tyler, Stephen, Larry, I really thank you guys for your time today. I hope this has been informative to you guys. I've certainly enjoyed it. Thank you much.
Absolutely. Our pleasure. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.